Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time out to join us this morning. I'm Dan Wire. I will be moderating this. I participate with the Maumee Watershed Alliance. We have one more yet to join us, Jerry Raynor, the Indiana State Conservationist. So we will be able to patch him in as soon as possible. Again, you see on your screen, this is a series, just a little background. The Maumee Watershed Alliance has evolved name-wise. Purpose has been the same. We started off as a Tri-State Watershed Alliance. We've had 2 Rivers Summits. They seem to be about 5 years apart. We did one in 2011. We did one in 2015. And this one we tried to get in the can last year. Of course, a lot of things were turned upside down because of COVID. So we've decided to break this into a 3-part series. We are looking forward to hopefully holding something on the water later this summer, maybe early fall. But in an effort to just keep the issue of water quality in our rivers and surface waters in front of people, we're adapting to the times. So Marcy Kaptur from Ohio was not able to join us. Dave Heine was walking to a budget meeting at the state capitol this morning. We've got just a little bit of a video we will play from him. And then we will again have Jerry Raynor, state conservationist in Indiana. We will have John Wilson, acting STC, Ohio State Conservationist. Both of those are USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service entities. And we have Mayor Tom Henry, City of Fort Wayne, and Mayor Mike McCann, Mayor of Defiance, Ohio. So collectively, our guests view water quality issues through the lenses of legislative actions, state level implementation of natural resource conservation objectives, and then of course local impacts from our mayors who are actually riverfront city mayors. So those who are listening online, please, if you have any questions, post those on the chat. We've got Mike Whirling here with the Maumee Watershed Alliance. We'll be monitoring those, and if we can get those worked into the discussion, we would be happy to do that. But please, if you do have questions, give us some contact information in case we don't have an opportunity to get them worked in this very fast hour. We would like to get back to you with answers to the questions that you may have. So thank you everyone for taking time out of your schedule to join us. And then we have a tech person sitting here. And I think what I would like to do is to go ahead and have the little video that Representative Heine shared with us. Now, keep in mind, he was walking down the hallway, the Capitol building in Indianapolis. So the video might not be the greatest, but the message is very important for all of us.
Let's just cut right to the chase. Why don't you, if you will, in just a few minutes, why don't you share sort of your thoughts with regards to the concerns up here in the northeast part of Indiana with regards to the Lake Erie water quality issues and what the potential ramifications are not only to the state but to this region and those of us that live and work here in the region?
Well, here are my thoughts. And as you know, I went over with you to Lake Erie and I saw the algae and I sat in the meeting with those Ohio State people. And all I could think about is I wonder when they're going to sue us, state of Indiana. And as a state representative, member of the Ways and Means Committee, all of a sudden you look at it a little bit different. And I don't want to get sued. And I am very comfortable in what you guys are doing. You're doing all the right things. And as you know, Greg, and I hope everybody in the room knows, you know, I grew up on a farm. I'm a farmer all my life. And we were just talking a little bit about this. I honestly can tell you, I do not know one farmer in my area that actually doesn't do a good job for our environment. And I told this to Greg, but I can still remember my dad always telling us as young kids, you always leave it a little bit better than what you found it. And when I think about the farmers in my area, I can honestly tell you they're doing a good job and doing what you want them to do. So I believe our farmers are doing a good job. I believe, and then the number 2, they said was the next problem was Fort Wayne. And you know, I believe Fort Wayne is doing their part with putting that, what they're doing under, putting in that tunnel. So they're doing their part, in my opinion. Number three, they talked about animal waste, and I believe the farmers are doing a good job at that. But so I think we're doing all of our jobs, and you're testing the water and everything. So we're doing our job. But I'll tell you what, they need a scapegoat, and it's going to be us. Do we need to put more money into the Maumee watershed, wherever you want it to go? You'd have to tell me. But I sit down here and I see what they're doing for Kankakee watershed. Down south, they're setting up a commission for a watershed. I'll tell you, I'll do everything I can. If you guys need more money in order so we don't get sued, I'll do everything I can to try to put some money in the budget so we can do what we need to do so we don't get sued. That's, I guess, what I would tell you.
I appreciate those comments. I appreciate your willingness to be of assistance and support the efforts up here. We will definitely take the offer up for consideration, and you will be hearing back from us. Good luck today as you move into your general session. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day, guys.
See ya.
So we are very appreciative of Representative Heine taking a little time to share with us this morning. And I think all of us would agree that water quality is key to our communities and the region as a whole. But each of you come with a little bit different perspective. And mayors, you've got some responsibilities for water quality in your communities. And I think you can see those also as some financial drivers, incentives. But I would like to first go to our state conservationists, and I've got a question for them. And Jerry and John, Jerry, I think I would like to start with you. And I'm going to ask you both the same question and your perspectives. And if you feel it's necessary to share with the group a little bit about what is a state conservationist, feel free to do that as well. So Mr. Raynor, if I may, I'd like to start with you and asking this question, and this was on our batch of questions that we sent out. What do you feel is the single most important action that should be taken to ensure the improvement in water quality as it relates to the rivers, streams, and lakes in your area? Jerry Raynor, are you on board?
I am, and can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity to share with the group this afternoon. I will start with, as in the position of state conservationist, we're responsible for the delivery of the federal conservation programs within our respective states. How and through our partnerships and how we deliver those our services, and then the planning and getting conservation on the ground, that's done through a variety of ways. But without the most important person, which is our landowners and producers, none of this works. This voluntary conservation effort, it's great. It's a wonderful effort. It makes people want to have a buy-in. But after listening to the previous presentation and our legislative bodies being concerned with being sued, who's going to be the one that the finger gets pointed at to say you're responsible for this. I have some of those same beliefs that most of the producers and those who are operating on the landscapes in Indiana or any other state, they're doing the best they can to prevent any of these issues from occurring. What we don't understand, or what the general public may not see, is all the factors that come into that into the industry when it comes to our production and food dependency and food growth. There are so many factors that impact that growth and the planning and the process. We don't always get to see how it affects our ecosystem, how it affects our environment. But the single most important action that we can take to protect the water quality is first to accept the fact that we all have a protective role to play when it comes to the longevity of our natural resources. We are seeing that our Indiana farmers recognize water as one of the nation's most precious resources, but every day we are working with new producers who are stepping up to work hand in hand with NRCS to implement systems to conserve the water and keep these valuable nutrients in the field and out of our local waterways. No farmer wants to waste or even have the inkling of wasting one nutrient. Like the cost is too much for them just to be for the public to have that general implication that they're wasteful, they're not efficient with what they do. No matter how old or new the equipment may be, I do know farmers have one thing in mind, and that's the nutrients they apply. They want them to be fully utilized, and there are no waste, and no waste comes about in that growth process. So while we're taking the initiative up front, we have some farmers that are new and that we are working with, but taking the action that we all have a role to play, and I'm going to do my part, is the single most important thing to me.
And Mr. Wilson, I want to pivot to you in just a moment, but I do want to share with those that are listening, we had an opportunity to have Jerry Raynor on the rivers last summer. It was an interesting thing on the pontoon ride with everybody with masks on, but we really appreciate Mr. Raynor's support in coming up to Fort Wayne and spending a little time with us and learning more of what we do. We've had Mayor Henry on the river as well, and Mayor McCann. In defiance, through the Maumee Watershed Alliance, we've taken our pontoon over there so they can begin to do the same things that we started as precursory efforts here in Fort Wayne of actually getting folks out in the river so they can see and experience it. So, Mr. Wilson, I would like to ask you the same question. What do you feel is the single most important action that should be taken to ensure the improvement in water quality?
Okay, I'm sorry. I am just getting on. I had all kinds of issues signing in. So what was your question again? I'm sorry.
Okay. Again, thank you very much for joining us, and looking forward to an opportunity when we can finally meet. For the rest of the folks, so you know, Mr. Wilson has just stepped into the Ohio State Conservationist position. I'm certain that he has a lot of background, but the question, Mr. Wilson, is, what do you feel is the single most important action that should be taken to ensure improvement in water quality as it relates to in Ohio, rivers, streams, and lakes?
Okay, I would say the most important action is certainly to continue to work together. We've put together a partnership in the Western Lake Erie Basin. I know you guys are well aware, but to continue to work together to find our part of the puzzle to fit, and certainly NRCS in Ohio is working with our USDA programs, financial assistance programs, as well as providing technical assistance to the farmers in the area. So certainly our niche is certainly to work hand in hand with the farmers, provide some technical assistance as well as financial assistance to address those resource concerns, the nutrients in the water, and work to help those farmers address that using a scientific background that we have in order to continue to address the nutrients in the Western Lake Erie Basin. Certainly there's a lot of legacy out there that we're working to address, and to make sure that we address those nutrients with a comprehensive nutrient management plan, or at least a nutrient management plan, so that we can use all of the nutrients. The plants will use the nutrients that are applied, and also able to use some of the nutrients that are in the legacy. So that I would say would be the most important thing right now offhand.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Welston. I'm beginning to hear a common theme here in our first couple of speakers talking about partnerships and needing to rely on science and nutrient loading being one of the first things that pops up. I'd like to go to the mayors now. And Mayor Henry, I'd like you to respond to this first. We had a few questions specifically pulled out for mayors, and Mayor McCann really highlighted 3 of them that I think might be a really good stepping off point for us to bring the mayors into the conversation. So Mayor Henry, can improved water quality be an economic driver? And if so, have you seen this impact your community? Mayor, you're muted. Thank you, sir.
There we go. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me today to participate in this forum. Unquestionably, water quality is becoming more and more primary importance to those employers that wish to call Fort Wayne home. And we've struggled with this for a number of years. Many of you know that we have 3 rivers that converge in the downtown of our city. The St. Mary's and the St. Joseph form the Maumee, which then goes obviously eastward towards Toledo. For years, billions of gallons of raw sewage and other contaminants were dumped right into our river. Obviously that was inexcusable in today's standards, but years ago, no one gave it a second thought. But the quality of our water is becoming more and more important to our community, as well as everyone else who our community feeds into. So what we've done as a primary driver to try to correct this situation is to build a deep rock tunnel. It's about 200 feet underground. Other communities have done the same thing, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, other large communities. We've sent teams to see what they did and how successful they were. And as a result, we did go ahead and venture into that initiative ourselves. The tunnel is about 20 to 30 feet in diameter. It's 5 miles long. It goes through our entire downtown area. And when finished, we're going to be able to feed a number of our arteries, if you will, of piping into that major tunnel, which then will go to our filtration plant. And that water then is clean prior to going into our rivers. In fact, we are probably going to be able to flush out, if you will, about 90% of the contaminants prior to the dumping of water into our rivers. Once employers find out that we're doing that, and we're going to a significant expense, which incidentally has been part of an initiative that the federal government wanted us to do. Our ultimate cost will be about $180 million. And we're on our own it's an unfunded mandate, if you will, from the feds. So we're on our own to pay for that. But interestingly enough, when we went to our citizens and explained what we wanted to do and how we wanted to remove contaminants from our rivers, we got very few complaints. Now this is going to be paid for over 20, 25 years. But the fact that we received very few negative responses, I think, spoke volumes for our community as understanding the importance of clean water, and the fact that we ourselves should not be responsible any more than possible as far as the cleanliness of our water that we're discharging down the river, if you will. But as employers find out that we're doing that and going to the lengths that we are, it has been a tremendous statement towards the quality of life of our community.
Mayor, those are very positive comments there. And as you know, I've been around the rivers for a while, and I think that the Mayor McCann in Defiance would probably relate to some of those very same things. And one of the last items you touched on was how responsible are we for the water that comes into our community and the water that passes out of our community. Kind of, raises the question of what responsibility do we have to upstream and downstream partners. So Mayor McCann, I would like to come back to that first question to you. Can improved water quality be an economic driver? And if so, have you seen this as an impact on your community? Mayor McCann.
Well, it absolutely can, Dan. And when you think about it, if you look across the country or across the world, where does the most expensive pieces of real estate lie? And that's waterfront. Doesn't make any difference whether you're in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Defiance, Ohio, down in Florida, on the East Coast, on the West Coast. Folks want to be near the water, simply because, in my opinion, one of the things I like most about the water is it really has a calming effect on folks. As far as being an economic driver, it absolutely can. And, like Fort Wayne, here in Defiance, we have 3 rivers as well. We have the Maumee that comes from Fort Wayne. We have the Tiffin that comes down from the north. We have the Au Glaize that comes up from the south, and they all converge right here in Defiance as well. And then we send all that up past Napoleon into Toledo. But what we've lacked, what we haven't done, and what Fort Wayne recognized a few years ago and has started to do, is we have not capitalized on that waterfront property. And we're beginning to do that, starting to talk about it. But just last week, for example, we had a younger couple that we met with, and they're going to open a business this summer, a kayaking and pontoon rental business that are going to take people on tours. And as Dan mentioned earlier, we've borrowed the pontoon from the Indiana folks and offered pontoon rides here in Defiance. And I'll tell you, it's quite a thrill for me to be able to captain a boat and give some young people their first boat ride. And to be able to do that with some more regularity here in Defiance is going to be a boom for us, I believe. But let's take a look at just that one business that is now going to rely on the water quality of that Maumee and Au Glaize rivers. A couple years ago, fortunately, we didn't have that problem last year, but a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, there was a no contact order for the Maumee River around Defiance that was issued by our health department, which meant you couldn't go in the water. So now we have this couple that are making an investment in pontoon boats and in kayaks, and they're going to have a rental business. If we would have a similar issue with our river this summer that we had a few years ago, that would shut that business down, and that would, for them, would be catastrophic, because they need that revenue to move their business along. And that's just one story about a young couple that I believe are going to have an impact. The other thing that I think you all are aware of is the primary source for our water, our drinking water here in Defiance, is that Maumee River. And when the Maumee River quality, the quality of that water degrades, then we rely on our reservoir, but that's not an infinite supply of water. So at some point, when our reservoir gets so low, we've got to take the water out of the Maumee River, whether we like it or not. And so we're very, very conscious of all that. And if we can't supply water to our citizens, and more importantly, or equally important, to our businesses, then we're going to struggle. And so water quality, quite honestly, is one of the most important things we deal with.
Very positive comments there, Mr. McCann. Thank you. The fact that both of our communities here get our drinking water out of the rivers. And I will give a stamp or a thumbs up to you that one of our entities here that was really critical in just getting the public awareness of what our rivers were was an outfitter, just like you're going to be having this summer with canoes and kayaks. I would like to shift back to the state conservationists with the next question here. And we've talked a lot about partnerships, so this kind of lends into it. And I'd like to get some input from the state conservationists. And Mr. Raynor, I guess I'd like to start with you. There are various entities throughout the region that are all addressing the water quality efforts. Has this been helpful? Are they a hindrance? Or is there certain partnership that you would like to see strengthened as we all address water quality? Mr. Raynor.
Yes, I would truly love to see all of these partnerships strengthened. I think we collectively, we can do a great job at solving some of these concerns we have. But there are some innovative things going on that our agency may not be aware of, or some of the other partners may not be aware of. And how do we pull ourselves together to make sure that these new innovative efforts can be a collaborative part of what we traditionally do and how we solve resource concerns on the landscape. There is no better method, no better approach than to solving these issues than to having these partners come together. We see our resource concerns or the issues on the landscape from our lens, and then the mayors may be seeing it from a different lens. And I'm sitting here listening. He's correct. I lived on the East Coast. There's no more valuable property than that along a waterfront. And sometimes they don't care how good the quality of water is. It will fluctuate with price, but that's where people want to be. And when that's the case, we need to make sure that we're all doing, I got back to what I said earlier, we're all doing our part to make sure we're protecting and improving the quality of the water. But the partnerships, even here in Indiana, we're moving in different directions. We're even focusing more in the urban agriculture area outreach, awareness, even conservation measures in those landscapes as well. Mr. Wilson talked about nutrient management, the 4R stewardship program that's being delivered by Indiana Ag Nutrient Alliance, which is a recently formed partner over the past couple of years there. Your TNC, your land conservancy organizations, our local soil and water districts, even our tri-state Western Lake Erie Basin partnership here. There are a lot of partners that can come to the table and bring a lot of things, but we have to find out what are those critical issues, who are the important partners to bring to the table. Even if NRCS is not the most important partner, I'm sure there's a part we play in improving the water quality in whatever situation it may be. Mayor McCain, you just mentioned, you know, having that order where you really can't even get into your water bodies at all. There's a no contact order. What happened? What was and all of us as partners need to be at the table to find out, okay, what happened? Was it on a farm landscape? Was it something that happened in an industrial area? What can we do as partners that would help alleviate any of these situations? I think that actually helps keep somebody from having the finger pointed directly at them if we're all at the table to say, look, we understand we all have a common issue. We're going to work together to solve this issue. And no matter whose issue it is, we're all to blame with this. So take the finger pointing out from when it comes to the partnership, and always point the finger at those who are doing a great job at their part of preserving and improving our water quality. We're all going to be better off from that because we're going to get enough finger pointing from the outside. So I really believe in our partnerships, the more we can bring to the table, the more people that can focus on their particular direction. Those innovative approaches are truly going to be needed from all partners, but then those who are really on the landscape, even the young couple who's looking at investing and building that business there. What are their thoughts? What are the research that they've been provided, not only on the business side, but what type of water quality efforts, who they've been talking to as partners. Us knowing all of those things will be able to help build a bigger strategy to say, look, here's how we can improve in water quality efforts across the board. The last thing I will say, then we have to manage those improvements. Now we have to be able to document, here's where we started, here are the improvements that are being made, here are those incremental changes that say these are sustainable for a long period of time.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Raynor. I would like to go to Mr. Wilson, and I'm going to pivot just a little bit from the question and just for the general audience, this partnership, and that's our tagline for the Maumee Watershed Alliance, Partnerships for Improving Water Quality. Rivers do not care about geopolitical boundaries. And I think that's why the Maumee Watershed Alliance has come together. There are programs that sometimes there needs to be an entity that can cross across counties and state lines as well. And Mr. Wilson, I would suspect that you're probably aware of the gentleman that was sitting in your seat just prior to you, Terry Cosby. The Maumee Watershed Alliance a year or so ago entered into a contract agreement with the state of Ohio, with the state conservationists, to do work on both sides of the state line in all for water quality. So, Mr. Wilson, what I'd like to ask you is, are there any new initiatives that are being considered to address water quality that you'd like to champion, and that you see any specific partnerships that can help you in addressing it?
Well, you know, there are new initiatives. There's always opportunities to, from an NRCS perspective, we have the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Certainly there's opportunities to address resource concerns across state lines, county lines, and all those boundaries that really, like you said, the river does not recognize. So certainly there are opportunities there. That's one of the things that we have. But certainly we work as a NRCS, a tri-state initiative where we work hand in hand with Indiana and Michigan to look at things on a regional basis, a Western Lake Erie Basin perspective, work with our staffs to identify those resource concerns that we address together to get some, I guess, common ground on that. So we're working that way. There's always opportunities to increase partnerships. You know, we have the demonstration farms over in Ohio that helps, you know, identify those activities that really address the resource concerns on a demonstration basis so that we can share that across the watershed and continue to work with the different NGOs, local, the soil and water conservation districts, certainly state governments, and you know, in Ohio, they got the H2O program that the state government is really working to address those resource concerns in the Western Lake Erie Basin. But certainly, like you said, resource concerns does not go, or at least look at the boundaries that we put in, a political boundary. So, but we want to continue to work using a scientific-based approach to address those resource concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Very good. I think, unfortunately, Ohio, particularly Toledo, has a tendency to capture the headlines when we have algal blooms there, when we have excess nutrient loading that happens. So now I'd like to come to the mayor's perspective. And Mayor Henry, I'd like to start with you first. And you've already addressed this just a little bit. But the question is, as a community, and I would say in Allen County or Fort Wayne specific, as a community, how do you see your responsibility to those upstream and downstream? And how do your efforts impact specifically the downstream communities without getting too much into science, just a high level view?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we certainly have a responsibility to whatever water leaves our community that we're responsible for as far as the water that runs through our system. But just as important to me is what goes on upriver. It's been mentioned several times about farm runoff and industrial runoff affecting the community. Much of it does come down the St. Joe River, which is our drinking water source. So we have to constantly communicate with those upriver as far as the need to protect the water as much as they can, because that's our drinking water. But also what's very interesting, I don't think this has been mentioned yet, but one of the main culprits, if you will, as far as contamination of the water that we receive into our community are the amount of geese that we have in Fort Wayne and north. The goose droppings, if you will, have been a major source of concern by our city utilities people. And unfortunately, it's getting worse, and we're having a very difficult time with that particular challenge. But we have a good communication going with those north of our city. As far as, again, going back to our to the farm runoff and industrial runoff, I think we've been very successful as far as working with them so that whatever we get from the north is, for the most part, as clean as possible. And I think they've accepted that responsibility very well. And as I mentioned, with our deep rock tunnel being built, and the fact that we also turn a lot of the waste that we receive from our community, much of it is pumped through our filtration plant and then diverted to a methane producing initiative that we have, where we turn a waste into methane, ultimately to electricity to power our plants. And we're doing more and more of that. So we're trying to eliminate it from that perspective as much as we can too, going into the river. So I think we're trying to address it from the north as far as what we're receiving. And obviously, I think we're taking great measures to protect the communities downriver from us.
Thank you very much, Mayor Henry. And just for those that are listening, our second series that'll be coming up March 10th, we're going to drive down a little bit closer into, as Mayor Henry references, our plant operators, not only for our potable water to drink, but then when we address the sewer systems within the city and that water eventually goes back into the water, what is the impact of water quality on that civic infrastructure?
Right.
So Mayor McCann, same question to you. As a community, how do you see your responsibility to those upstream and downstream? And feel free to add, if you're comfortable with this, that as you have worked with implementing the Clean Water Act mandates, as Mayor Henry mentioned earlier, at times you have, if I understand this correctly from your city staff and engineers, the water coming in to Defiance is worse than it is leaving as a result of some of the efforts within Defiance City and Defiance itself. So again, Mayor McCann, as a community, how do you see your responsibility to those upstream and downstream?
Well, we have a huge responsibility. There's absolutely no question with that. Listen, we've already spent $60 million, little old Defiance, Ohio. Our water and wastewater customers have spent $60 million in mitigating combined sewer overflows. And we've taken care of the biggest offenders. We've done that. But what science has proven is that our combined sewer overflows only contribute less than 1% of the total pollutants in our Maumee River watershed. So we're going after 1% of the problem. Well, what's the other 99% of the problem? Everybody else, Mr. Rayner, Mr. Wilson, Mayor Henry, have all talked about this. And how can we mitigate that? I'm not a finger pointing kind of guy. Let's recognize what the problem is and what can we do about it. And Jennifer English, who's all things water here in Defiance and who coaches me up every day, has made it abundantly clear that the science and the technology is out there that can help with this problem. 80%, the Maumee River watershed, as you guys all know better than I, is the largest watershed into any of our Great Lakes. So why aren't we addressing what we can do about it? Why don't instead of spending millions and millions of dollars more on these CSOs that are going to have absolutely no difference on water quality or no measurable difference, why don't we invest it in the things that can and allow us to expand on this watershed approach? I'm sorry that U.S. Representative Marcy Kaptur can't be on here because she's as aware, if not more aware, of some of the things that have been talked about and some things that was done. It was quite a few years ago, even before I was mayor, that I heard a proposal from Representative Kaptur suggesting that at some point in the Maumee River watershed that we direct all of that water through a large wetland, if you will, and allow some of those nutrients to be absorbed, much like the Everglades do down in Florida. And that is absolutely something that we need to revisit. We've tried to do it recently here in Defiance by using that H2O money that you talked about, Dan. We've tried to acquire some farm ground, but we have some farmers that would prefer to farm than get fair market value for their farm ground. we have some interesting things we'd like to try, and we've just got to get some farmers to cooperate with us. And let me just say, the other thing what we've got to do here is we need to have the connectivity in place. We're a rural area. We need to have the connectivity in place that will allow us to get real-time data that we're measuring as this water flows by. And a lot of things that we need to work on. We need a little bit of cooperation. We need a lot of money, but we would love to redirect some of that $60 million to something that's going to be much more productive on the water quality side.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor McCann. You raise an interesting point, and I want to come back now to a state conservationalist. But you had mentioned working with landowners and the farmers, the Nature Conservancy, which we have a representative on the board of the Maumee Watershed Alliance. When I first got involved in this, I couldn't understand why an organization like the Nature Conservancy would be interested in working with farmers. And then I finally got the point through my thick head. First of all, a little known fact, other than the state of Indiana, I think the Nature Conservancy owns more land in Indiana than any other entity. But their answer was, we can't buy up all the land we need to do the environmental work we need. So we need to partner with landowners to help them understand what best management practices might be. So, Mr. Rayner, I would like to start with you, and I'm going to sort of combine two questions together, but I think they blend well. What are you most often asked in regards to improving water quality? And there are always new and early adopters, kind of referring to the Nature Conservancy and trying to work with landowners to implement best management practices. So, what are you most often asked in regards to water quality? And there's always new and early adopters. How do we bring more of those on board, Mr. Raymond?
The first part, what have we most often asked? And that question, and let me try to break it up in a couple of parts. When it comes to our conservation partners, it's just what both of our mayors have mentioned. How do we impact water quality at a greater level? Where do we get the biggest bang for our buck if we want to move forward in making these improvements? So that's one part. We also understand with our agency and in the realm of conservation, NRCS brings the biggest bulk of the financial assistance to the table when we're working on these private lands. And so that leads to the next part of how do we get more of our private landowners, landholders, producers to buy into these conservation efforts? And how do we get them to install these conservation practices, maintain those practices for not only a farm production standpoint, but also for the greater benefit of the environment? That's probably the biggest challenge that we have. While we know conservation practices work, they do wonders in the areas that we have them installed. What would make a landowner or producer want to install these practices or enter into any of these federal programs, whether it's for a management practice or whether it's for a conservation easement or wetland easement? How do we encourage more people to participate along those lines? That's the biggest challenge we have, and that comes, I've worked in several states, and that's the same challenge we have in every state. When you talk about the new farmers coming on or all of the new technology, all of that's wonderful if we have enough money to put it in place, especially where it's needed. Mayor McCann just talked about being able to install the right equipment to measure the water quality, whether it's coming or going, depending on the location. I do know the expense of some of the equipment, and then the expense of maintenance and monitoring the equipment. That can get really expensive, but those things are truly needed. And how do we form those partnerships to get those things in place? How do we expand into these innovative areas One of the things you did mention, and I'm glad I had a chance to hear that. You spent a lot of money. You spent $60 million on less than 2% of your problem. So are we able to identify where the other portion of that 98, 99% is? What's contributing? Who are the agencies or partners or individuals that can help make those improvements? And then how do we develop a strategy to pull those things together so we can make those incremental changes? You've worked and corrected the 2%. Where's the next 5% that we need to focus on and put money toward that? And after that, is there another 10%? And who is that group that's responsible that we can, and I'll because I will say from a farm landscape, it could be that we have nutrient management imbalances in areas closer to our watershed versus those that are far away. Or we could have animals that are still utilizing our water supply, not only for hot weather, but for drinking or for whatever else they may feel is important. Mayor Henry just mentioned that your geese challenge that you had. So all of those things play their part, but how do we fix each one of those things individually? One thing we do need to keep in mind, now that we're managing and testing and we have the populations in place where it truly matters and water quality is now at the forefront, those water quality challenges we're having did not get there in the past 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. And it's going to take 10, 15 years, ever how long it took to create that problem, for us to start turning that ship in a different direction. And it's going to continue to take all of us in our efforts, but then more money, more innovation, different solutions. I'm glad to hear you mention the wetland solution. I think that's a big problem solver for a lot of nutrient management problems that we have. But then how do we divert that much water through a huge landscape? And then, as you said, we just have another challenge. Where do we get the land? Farmers do not want to forego their farming land for the benefit of the water quality for a bigger section. And then it kind of goes back to what you asked the first question. So depending on who you're talking to, what's in it for me? As a farmer that's been farming their traditional means for years, they've been productive at it, things have been working well, why would I want to change?
I'd like to jump in here because I think that's a very powerful comment. It's going to kind of pivot the question a little bit. Mr. Wilson, I hope you're ready for this one. The little bit that I've been around working in water quality, there were discussions about bringing in social scientists. And I couldn't understand for the life of me why we did that. But Mr. Rayner just mentioned it. We've got people who have been doing what they've been doing successfully for years. And we are really expecting people to sort of change their patterns. So, Mr. Wilson, again, the question is, there's early and new adopters. How do we bring more people along? And is it maybe a blend between money to put on the land and money to work with the social science, people's willingness to accept these challenges or not? Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I think certainly there's a room to include the social scientists and, to get them involved to identify what are the reasons and purposes that you have the early adopters, but more so, what are the reasons that kind of keep some folks from really, trying to give it a shot. So certainly, I think if we continue to provide financial assistance to those early adopters, make it available to those folks that may be on the fence about it. But also, one of the things we really focus on right now, the two major programs, certainly is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. But once those folks get involved with that particular program, it also provides an opportunity for them to get more involved in the Conservation Stewardship Program, which increases, or basically we work on a whole farm perspective. They enroll their entire operation, and then they work to basically provide enhancements, not only address the resource concern, but try to improve it through that program. But we have the technology right now to identify those locations that may give us the best bang for the buck. You know, that's one of the things, like Jerry was saying, you know, what could we do differently? Well, and one of the things that people ask is, you know, how can we get the most bang for the buck? Well, identifying those locations where the money it could be spent in to address a resource concern in a more critical area. But then we have to deal with, you know, the incentive. What is the incentive for the producer in addition to creating cleaner water and addressing sedimentation going into the watershed? But certainly there's, you know, how much land are they willing to give up, or how do we compensate them for that? So there's always opportunities for that. And then to get those folks that are still kind of on the fence or looking at what's going on, certainly we can invite them to the demonstration farms, to field days, to hopefully get their, you know, appetite wet for at least to give it a try, and also have those financial incentives. So that's the kind of outreach that I think we need to really look at where those folks are. And it's, you know, we know where we've been, so it kind of helps to look at some of those folks that traditionally don't participate in those programs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We're getting close to the end of the hour, and it might be a little bit easier to see some successes when we get a little bit closer to the ground. So mayors, I'd like to come back to you, and if you can answer briefly, and Mayor Henry, again, we'll start with you. What can you mark as water quality successes or improvements in your community?
Probably the most successful has been our acquisition of land along the rivers. You know, for years, the rivers were a real detriment to our community. Whenever there was a high water event, we would have businesses and homes, and neighborhoods flooded. So, and we went through this for decades. But we finally decided one of the best ways to address this was to buy up as much property as we could. Now, a lot of our area was urban in contrast to the farmland, but we bought up homes, we turned them into parks. One of our biggest parks downtown is Headwaters Park, which is a beautiful park with pavilions and other types of scenic offerings. But during a high water event, that whole area floods by design. And actually, we've done that down the St. Mary's. We've done it a little bit on the St. Joe. The St. Mary's has been our biggest problem. So we bought a lot of that property, and not only does it help out from a flooding perspective, but as was said earlier, it deposits a lot of contaminants that normally would have gone downriver onto the land. So that, and I know that you've been a big part of that, Dan, but I think that was probably one of our more successful programs, was the acquisition and change in focus of a lot of that land that went along the St. Mary's.
Good, thank you, Mayor Henry. And Mayor McCann, successes in Defiance. And I know maybe you haven't been as long-term a mayor as Henry, but what successes have you seen in your community?
You know, Jennifer English, who I spoke about earlier, always has these cute little things that she'll talk about. And one of the things she talks about, whether it's true or not, is something we use: the solution to pollution is dilution. And that's catchy. But I will say this, I think as important as dilution may be, the solution to pollution may well be education. And that is something that we have begun to do here in Defiance, is to talk about what the average person can do that will help impact water quality, albeit in a small way. You know, we've tried to educate people that when you mow your grass and you collect the clippings, the river is not the appropriate dumping ground for those grass clippings and leaves. And be careful when you're fertilizing your yard, that 5 pounds of fertilizer that goes onto the street should be swept up, not brushed into the catch basins. So certainly education is something we can do. And, you know, we can argue that $60 million was way too much money to spend on combined sewer overflows, and it probably was for the impact. Could have been better spent, but nonetheless, we've done it, and hopefully to some degree it's helped. The other thing, we as a city have begun to install on construction projects more and more green infrastructure. It's been a little difficult for the folks in the community to accept because they look at them more as weed beds, and they are not at all. They're engineered, they're designed, they're built to certain standards. And as water flows through those, the water gets cleaned up. And the one thing we're weak on, as I said earlier, is we have not yet put in place an efficient way of monitoring the water as it flows in and the water flows out. That's the science that I still want to see that will help me sell this even more. But I truly believe, as small as it may seem, educating the general public on what they can do to improve our water quality has been one of our biggest successes.
Thank you very much, Mayor McCann. We're getting close to the end here, and this would be a time for us to recognize our sponsors for the event. And in all honesty, I want to say from the position of the Maumee Watershed Alliance, it is all of you that have been sharing today, not only personally, but the entities that you represent. The City of Defiance has provided financial support and exposure for the Maumee Watershed Alliance, as had Mayor Henry, the city administration in Fort Wayne, as well as getting people out there. Jerry Raynor has come up taking a ride with us. I mentioned that before, but we've worked with the state conservationists in Indiana as well as the state conservationists in Ohio. And we've got a lot of people who have joined us today. I certainly want to recognize the efforts of the Maumee River Basin Commission. A lot of the property buyouts that they initiated turned it back to green space. So we've got that opportunity to do a little filtering like the wetlands that people have mentioned. So all of you, thank you very much. I hope you have a productive and safe day. And again, we will be having another conversation getting a little closer on March 10th. Then on April 7th, it's going to be a little bit longer. We'll break it up into sections, but we're going to bring in the science, as many of you have mentioned. That will be in April 7th. And then hopefully we can get an opportunity to bring people together in the fall. So again, thank you everyone for the Maumee Watershed Alliance for your time today.
Thank you. And thank you to the mayors for sharing your experiences. It's refreshing to hear. And if there are things that we can assist with, don't hesitate to let us know.
Thank you. Thank you all.